real. Nothing you see is real. This is the dead internet theory. 2025. Everything and everyone you see online is fake. Before we get into this properly, let me first off say that this is a rapidly changing subject. Anything I say in this could be outdated in like a week, or already is outdated. You're gonna have to take this as a period piece of like when I wrote it. This also isn't a call to action or anything, just screaming into the void. Now, I'm in the generation that doesn't know a world without the internet, but I'm also old enough to have seen it grow exponentially into the titan that it's become. And in recent years, if there's one thing that's had my attention the most, it's the rise of the dead internet. Let's talk about it. Just as a heads up, I won't be spending a ton of time on the actual theory. This video is mainly about interesting things I found which are examples of it, rather than just reading off the Wikipedia page. Now, there's quite a few interpretations of the theory. To mash them all together in as basic of a form as I can, the dead internet theory argues that most of the content you see online, comments, posts, people, even likes and dislikes, is almost entirely created by or manipulated by bots. Other interpretations are similar, but don't go to the absolute extreme of everyone is a bot. Nothing is real. But for the purposes of this video, I'm not actually going to be sticking with any one interpretation of the theory. I'm going to be pretty flexible with it. Some of the theories also give different proposed groups behind these bots, such as the government, big tech, the shadow government. You get the drill. Normal conspiracy stuff. And yes, this is a conspiracy theory. Take everything here entirely with a grain of salt. At the same time, have an open mind and come to your own conclusions. It is pretty epic and cool to assume every single comment you read online is a bot. While the dead internet theory label was coined only a few years ago, in 2021, the general ideas behind it have been around for far longer. The signs of an impending bot doomsday have been around for quite some time. With the main aspects of the theory out of the way, let me be clear that this video isn't really about diving down some conspiracy rabbit hole about the Illuminati secretly gaslighting and controlling the world's population by selectively choosing which TikTok videos blow up. No. I'm interested in the real and currently observable instances of the dead internet part of the theory, happening in everyday places online. There's really no better place to start than with a little site which you might be familiar with. YouTube. Back when these old bones were youthful little boy bones in the distant year of 2009, I found a site called YouTube. I might have used it a little bit earlier than that, but what really matters is that I've seen it grow and evolve into what it is today. And I'm no tourist. YouTube has been my main entertainment platform for about as long as I can remember, which is probably quite sad and cringe, but it's true. Things on the site have generally been fine. You know, there's the occasional big controversy, an adpocalypse here and there, but nothing too crazy. In recent years, though, more and more synthetic content has been uploaded to YouTube, which you yourself have likely seen or at least heard about. Thankfully, YouTube has implemented some rules and guidelines which aim to disincentivize it, but this stuff is still being shat out at a rapid pace. I'll be completely honest here, this flood of content is one of the worst things to happen to the site in quite some time. And if YouTube doesn't keep setting strict guidelines on AI videos, it's only going to get worse. And just as a note, I'm not entirely against AI. It's a tool, it has uses, and you're allowed to use it however you want. But when it's used to create almost every aspect of a video, that's where we start having some problems. The you in YouTube is completely absent from any of these AI videos. And that is exactly what we're going to be talking about here. The absolute rabbit hole that is YouTube's AI video problem. Almost everything you'll see here was entirely created with AI. Visuals, scripts, voiceover, music, the whole shebang. HFY channels. This is where I first fell into the rabbit hole. Back in late 2024, I saw one of these in my recommendations, which jump-started this whole project. This is where it all began. And just so we're clear here, this is purely for educational purposes. Okay, this is purely education. This human has an alien girl harem all to himself, all pregnant. Me and the fellows were absolutely taken aback by what an insane title that was, and looked into the channel, which had hundreds of videos just like that. Let's not get too far ahead of things here. First off, what even are HFY channels? Well, for the most part, these are sci-fi storytelling channels, which go back quite a ways. They're usually stories about human ingenuity, space exploration, that kind of stuff. There's a good amount of legit channels reading these stories, so if you go looking, don't assume that every single one of them is AI. With that said, a lot of them are AI. HFY stands for humanity, fuck yeah, and an instant tell, or if one of these is being run by a bot, is when they describe it as something like HFY, humanity, heck yeah, or humans are special, HFY, which is clearly the bots not being able to say naughty words. The second tell, which also goes for pretty much everything we're going to look at after this, is that they don't even try to hide that it is very obviously entirely AI generated. I was initially just going to look at the all pregnant channel, but after doing some digging, I just kept on finding more. It was non-stop. Every time I thought I found the last of them, 5 more popped up. Some of these had thousands of videos, tens of thousands of subscribers, and pretty much all of them were making the exact same type of video. A generic AI narrator voice reading out a 30 to 50 minute long story, each one having an AI generated image to accompany, sometimes with slight movement on the image. That's it. That's the formula for every single one of these.
Look at this little baby.
Alien girl got stung by an alien bee. Now her booty's swelling up.
Hour long. Hour and 5 minutes. The Chad alien cow versus the soy alien.
While I was looking at these channels, I started doing a new research strategy which I will be patenting called a pregnant check, where I control F the word pregnant after loading all their videos. The amount of alien girl impregnation videos would shock you. I honestly lost count. And that's not even mentioning the amount of videos which followed the formula. Lonely human saves alien princess. He is rewarded in a very pleasant way.
On Christmas Day in 2012 at 6 in the morning, Jeffrey Epstein, who's just gotten out of a county jail where he had been serving a 13-month sentence, gets an email out of the blue from one of the richest men in the world. It reads, "I've been working to the edge of sanity this year, and so once my kids head home after Christmas, I really want to hit the party scene in St. Bart's or elsewhere and let loose. A peaceful island experience is the opposite of what I'm looking for." 2 months later, he emails Epstein again, asking which night on the island would have the wildest party. In return, Epstein offers to send a helicopter to bring him. That man was Elon Musk, and many years later, now the richest man on Earth, he would tell the world, publicly, disgustedly, in his own words, "Epstein tried to get me to go on his island, and I refused." He wrote, "I had very little correspondence with Epstein, and declined repeated invitations to go to his island or fly on his Lolita Express." But Elon Musk was lying, and he was not alone. For years, the friends of Jeffrey Epstein have been in a battle to prove their innocence. Who had known him only as a rich financier, and who knew his darkest secrets?
I never went to the island, I never met any women, and although the time was a mistake, it had nothing to do with that kind of behavior.
Who had cut him off after he went to prison the first time, and who came right back to support him after he was released? Who knew exactly what he was and stayed in his inner circle anyway?
Did have lunch with him as I was on a boat going across on a family vacation. I have nothing to hide.
And so now, with 3.5 million documents from Epstein's personal computer accounts being released to the public, we finally have an answer to all of these questions. And the answer is, almost everyone stayed around him. This video is brought to you by Nebula, the only place where you can watch Mad Kings, my new favorite docuseries that dives deep into the lives of some of the most insane and eccentric leaders of the modern era. So go to nebula.tv/Volksgeist to see that and countless other documentaries and movies from some of the best creators on the internet. More about that later. After he was named as a sex offender in front of the whole world the first time, Jeffrey Epstein's life didn't change much at all. There's a reason why the Epstein case is this case that simply will not die.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years.
Every single time more information is released, the pile of unanswered questions only wasn't the same as people taking a picture with Epstein 2 times at a New York City party in the early 90s. This is different. We now know exactly who Epstein was close with, who he strategized and planned with, who he shared code words with, and at the same time, the files also revealed that many of Epstein's crimes were far worse than originally thought. These aren't pieced together from short quotes and photos. These aren't theories. These are their own words in their own emails, exposed by the United States Department of Justice. And what it tells us about the world we live in is something that most of us already knew but couldn't quite prove. That there's a level of wealth and power in the world where the rules simply do not apply. Where you can plead guilty to sex crimes involving a child and then walk out of a private wing of a county jail a year later into a life that didn't change at all. We now know, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that the people who shape our laws, run our companies, sit on the boards of our most powerful institutions, invest in the things we eat and the platforms we use to talk to each other, those people are allowed to look at a man like Jeffrey Epstein, know exactly what he is, and decide that he's not a problem at all. The Epstein files aren't just a record of one man's crimes. They're a mirror held up to the people who control our world, and what it's reflecting is that the system isn't broken. It was built this way, and no one's emails prove it better than the people who fought the hardest to keep them buried in the first place. But don't take my word for it. Instead, let's look at theirs. Bill Gates, from 1995 to 2017, was the wealthiest person in the world. Before that, he was also the world's youngest billionaire during the 80s and 90s.
We're expecting to do just over 100 million this year.
And still, today, he's one of the top 10 richest men alive. And it's been known for a long time that Bill Gates and Epstein knew each other well enough for Gates to have flown on Epstein's plane and even have visited his island. Two things that have become this insane albatross around his neck ever since Epstein's death. When you read through these documents Epstein had prepared for Gates, though, I'll admit it looks like a pretty blatant attempt at blackmail. It's really easy to tell how Epstein knew exactly the reaction he was trying to elicit with every word he wrote. And for that reason, it feels pretty fake.
To add insult to the injury, you then implore me to please delete the emails regarding your STD, you request that I provide you antibiotics that you can surreptitiously give to Melinda in the description of your penis. You also made it clear to me that I am not to refer to redacted, as that is another topic that must remain between the two of us. And in return for all these requests, which I would have done without a second thought, I should continue to provide you the same level of service and dedication that I have done so diligently until you are ready to discard me and our friendship.
Bill Gates, of course, absolutely denies everything to do with him and Epstein. He has for years, and he still does today. And hey, to be fair to Bill Gates, nothing else in the docs technically corroborates the outlandish claims that Epstein makes in his email. The only problem is that denials only go so far when your own family refuses to stand in your corner. While Bill Gates and his team were outright dismissing the documents as the desperate ramblings of a man who clearly was trying to hold them hostage.
I never went to the island. I never met any women. And so, the more that comes out, the more clear it'll be that although the time was a mistake, it had nothing to do with that kind of behavior.
Melinda Gates had her own story to tell. In a brand new interview on NPR's Wildcard show, Bill Gates, now ex-wife of 27 years, described the latest Epstein document release as filling her with unbelievable sadness and reminding her of struggles she faced during her marriage. She would say,
I'm able to take my own sadness and look at these young girls and say, my God, how did that happen to them? At least for me, I've been able to move on in life, and I hope there's some justice for those now women.
I don't think it would take a chess grandmaster to figure out what she means by that. But Bill Gates is only one person in an ever-growing, seemingly endless list of people who stayed in Epstein's life, shamelessly supporting him for years while they knew he was a pedophile the entire time. But Bill Gates wasn't alone. In fact, when it comes to the full picture of Jeffrey Epstein's social life, this is only the tip of the iceberg. And perhaps nobody illustrates that better than the man who spent 2025 loudly demanding the Epstein files be released, only for their release to reveal his own lies. Elon Musk is the richest man in the world, inventor and leader of companies creating brain-computer interfaces, electric cars, rocket ships, and more. He's also a longtime friend of Jeffrey Epstein. On September 25th, 2012, Epstein writes to Elon Musk, "If you find some time, come visit me on my island in the Caribbean. Bring your friend or friends." Musk replies, "Sounds good. We'll try to make it." For years following his arrest and death, Elon Musk tried desperately to distance himself from Jeffrey Epstein. In September of 2025, as the case began to rear its head again, he wrote, "Epstein tried to get me to go on his island, and I refused." But as it would turn out, the truth would be nearly the exact opposite of what he had insisted for so long. 2 months after their first interaction, he emails Jeffrey Epstein to ask which day would have the wildest party on his island. He talks about wanting to let loose and have fun, and asks if Epstein has any parties planned because he needs the opposite of a peaceful island experience. In return, Epstein offers to send a helicopter to bring him. Another email from the fall of 2013 shows Epstein inviting Musk to visit him at his house in New York and meet many interesting people around the time of the UN General Assembly, to which Elon Musk responds with a rant about how busy he is. Before Epstein asks, "Do you think I'm retarded? Just kidding. There's no one over 25 and they're all very cute." Then, a year later, around Christmas time again, Elon Musk asks if it's a good time to visit the island. Even later on, they would email to coordinate times for Epstein to come have lunch and tour the SpaceX facilities with Musk, and even after that, they would talk more about Epstein's idea to expand Tesla distribution to Israel. Elon Musk's public reaction to these emails has been one of complete deflection and denial. However, his public statements do contradict what's in the messages. Elon Musk never refused to visit. In fact, he begged for invitations. He coordinated meetings. He invited himself, all while Epstein was a registered pedophile sex offender who just got out of prison 3 years earlier. And here's what should really terrify you. While Elon Musk and Bill Gates may have drawn the most attention, perhaps because their hypocrisy is so shocking, perhaps because of their stature as two of the richest men alive, they are ultimately just a few names out of tens of thousands of very powerful people who continued working and socializing with Epstein even after the whole world knew exactly who and what he was. Peter Attia, best-selling author, researcher, CBS contributor and ambassador, and investor in rapidly growing protein brand David. Overall, charming celebrity doctor, media personality, known around the world as an expert on aging and longevity. But when you search his name in the Epstein files, he comes back almost 2,000 times. In June of 2015, 6 years after Epstein got out of prison, Attia writes him an email with the subject, "Got a fresh shipment," with a now redacted image attached. Epstein replies with his own now redacted image. Attia says, "Please tell me you found that picture online." Epstein confirms that whatever it is in the image belongs to him, to which Attia responds, "The biggest problem with being friends with you is that the life you lead is so outrageous, yet I can't tell a soul." Over the years, Attia writes to Epstein about going through withdrawal when he wasn't seeing him. They would joke about the macronutrients in women's pussies. Attia would reach out to Epstein to talk about visiting his island. He would write, "Nothing like Little St. James, I bet." Their emails even reveal a dark truth from Attia's personal life. In a book he wrote in 2023, Attia shared that in 2017, he had been so selfishly absorbed with his work while on a trip to New York City that he did not go home to be with his family in California after his infant son had a heart attack, ultimately only returning 10 days after it had happened. Meanwhile, he had been emailing with Epstein to organize a meeting during that same week. Just days after the files were released, Attia wrote in his apology tweet that in November of 2018, he read the Miami Herald investigative article about Epstein and was repulsed and nauseated. But even that was just another lie. In reality, after Epstein's crimes were re-exposed by the Miami Herald in 2018, Attia's correspondence with him only continued, all the way up until the spring of 2019. Just before Epstein was arrested, Attia would continue emailing to check up on him. He would ask how he was doing in the wake of the article's release, making sure he was okay and that he wasn't taking it too hard. Clearly, he was not repulsed or nauseated enough to bring their friendship to an end. This is the pattern that emerges from Epstein's emails over and over and over. Prominent, powerful people knew exactly who he was and what he had done, and then they stayed in his circle anyway. Peter Attia is not unique in this. He's not even unusual. Honestly, despite everything I may be able to say about his lies and hypocrisy, he's a pretty minor player. Because the archive reveals dozens of others. Tech billionaires, Oscar-winning filmmakers, people whose names we know, people whose work we're familiar with and consume. And all of them tell the same story. We didn't know, we weren't close, and when we did find out, we cut ties immediately. But all of them are lying through their teeth. And so the question that just keeps coming back is simple. What the hell was in it for them? Why would these people stand alongside someone who was such a huge risk? And why are they lying about it now? And that tells you not just something about Epstein, but about what these people are. These people who run our companies, shape our politics, and build the technology and culture we consume every day. In the spring of 2012, Epstein was planning a trip to Paris, and during an email with a friend, he lets it slip that he's going with Woody. Woody, of course, being the 4-time Academy Award-winning, world-famous film director with 50 movies to his name, Woody Allen. And then, Epstein's friend asks if they're going for the pedophile convention. To which Epstein replies, I think philae is the plural. And Woody Allen, besides being a filmmaker, is also the man who began a sexual relationship with and later married his own ex-wife's adopted daughter. Woody Allen goes on to appear in the files 7,000 times. They plan visits to Little St. James and Epstein's ranch in New Mexico. They organize dinners in New York and Paris. Epstein gives him furniture. He coordinates with his wife. Woody Allen made movies. He has fame, influence, cultural capital. He's a highly respected artist. Really, he's one of the most beloved filmmakers alive. Critics praise his films. Journalists still clamor to talk to him. Actors want to work with him. He's received every award there is. But at the same time, he spent years scheduling visits to Jeffrey Epstein's island. And the fact that he was right there in Epstein's inner circle for years after the conviction, it tells you something that's deeper than just emails. It tells you that Epstein's world wasn't a shadowy conspiracy. It wasn't hidden. It was full of the same people our culture celebrates. His friends were directors with Oscars, scientists who stand on stage and give TED Talks and release best-selling books, politicians who decide our fate. These are the people we've been taught to admire, to trust, and to believe are the good ones in life. But they were all there and they all knew. And I think this is where the Epstein story starts to shift under our feet. It's stopped being about him and what he did, and instead he becomes this virus that spreads to everyone around him, until it spreads so far that the entire world starts looking different. Epstein didn't get away with anything because he was clever or even hiding at all. And that makes this not just his crime, but everyone's. Another person who appears repeatedly in Epstein's emails is Reid Hoffman, a tech entrepreneur from California who in the year 2000 became the senior VP of business development at PayPal, a position that would make him a millionaire after the company was sold to eBay a few years later. But then, along with other PayPal founders and employees, he became part of the PayPal Mafia, an informal group of former PayPal executives known for their own massive success after they sold PayPal to eBay. This network includes the founders of YouTube, Tesla, Palantir, Affirm, Yelp, as well as executives from Reddit, Sequoia Capital, Square, and more. In 2003, he would then co-found LinkedIn and would grow it into becoming the world's biggest business-oriented social media platform, selling it in the end to Microsoft for over $25 billion. Today, Reid Hoffman sits on the board of directors at Microsoft, as well as having sat on the board at OpenAI for several years, among involvement in various other AI ventures, with a total net worth in the billions. He also happened to blatantly lie to the whole world about the nature of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. In 2019, after Epstein was first arrested, Hoffman went on record saying that he only ever met with him for the purpose of fundraising for the MIT Media Lab, where he had a position at the time. But it would turn out that that was not true, and he had in fact had many more meetings with Epstein up until less than a year before his arrest, as well as having visited his island for a weekend in the summer of 2014. In 2015, Hoffman wrote an email to Epstein after news of his involvement with Prince Andrew first hit the news, offering to help manage the negative press coverage online to cover up what they had been accused of. And the PayPal Mafia just keeps showing up in Epstein's inner circle. Elon Musk, Reid Hoffman, and now even the company's founder himself, Peter Thiel, also appears in the Epstein files far more often than he ever admitted on his own. Peter Thiel, after founding and selling PayPal in the early 2000s, became a central figure in Silicon Valley, but not as an entrepreneur himself. Instead, he began a career in venture capital that would be considered by many a form of political investing. He would fund tech companies that disrupted traditional industries, building up a huge portfolio of companies like Airbnb, Uber, Stripe. He was even the first outside investor in Facebook, giving them $500,000 in exchange for 10% of the company in 2005. Meanwhile, he would advocate for libertarian politics on the side, giving big donations to figures like Ron Paul and more. But over the years, Peter Thiel's political perspectives shifted dramatically, generating skeptical media attention and a variety of questions around the nature of his influence ever since. At various times, Peter Thiel has advocated against women's rights to vote, publicly questioned the viability of democracy itself, called for a hyper-capitalist corporate takeover of world governments, and, most recently, delivered a series of lectures alleging that the biblical Antichrist is publicly emerging right now in the real world from the movement for environmental conservation. Perhaps most notably, though, the one exception to his career of mostly investing and advocating would be, of course, his second company, Palantir. Now worth over $300 billion, Palantir specializes in building intelligence tools for military and police use, and has been identified by many as essentially operating like a private surveillance state. And Peter Thiel appears in the Epstein files over 2,000 times, with records showing various lunch events, meetings, and visits throughout the 2010s. And while Peter Thiel would say that his interactions with Epstein were purely a product of Epstein being a, quote, crazed networker, records that emerged later would tell a completely different story. Because by 2015, Peter Thiel and Jeffrey Epstein were literally doing business together. In 2015 and 2016, Epstein invested a total of $40 million in Valor Ventures, a venture capital firm that Thiel had co-founded for funding tech companies outside the typical Silicon Valley bubble. Around that same time, Epstein began pitching that Thiel's fund should invest in an Israeli software company called Carbine that was making emergency communication apps, and they would invest tens of millions of dollars. And in addition to that, the Epstein files revealed that there would be dozens more meetings between Peter Thiel and Jeff Epstein, showing countless invitations and conversations over the years. And despite Peter Thiel diminishing his relationship with Epstein as inconsequential and transactional, they in fact stayed in contact all the way up until just a couple months before Epstein died, far after the world began to take interest in his case yet again. But as I was going through this part of the files, it started to look like Peter Thiel being dishonest was actually the least interesting part of his relationship with Epstein. Instead, I started asking, how did Epstein get involved with this Israeli company in the first place? Who brought it to him? Who connected him to the Israeli tech world and pushed him to shop it around Silicon Valley? And the answer to that is that this company, Carbine, that's today worth over $900 million and deployed all over the world, was co-founded by yet another good friend of Jeffrey Epstein, the former Prime Minister of Israel itself. Ehud Barak is a former general in the IDF who was active in Israeli national politics from the late 90s to the early 2010s, serving at different times as the Minister of Defense, the leader of the Labour Party, the head of the IDF, and at one point even as the country's Prime Minister as the successor of Benjamin Netanyahu's first term. He also appears in the Epstein files over 4,000 times, and looking at their relationship as revealed by the release of the Epstein archives, we can see a level of connection that goes far beyond casual acquaintance. Because from 2013 to 2017, Barak and Epstein are on record having met at least 40 times, and for some years, they had scheduled appointments every month. Epstein functioned in many ways as Barak's secret advisor, giving financial and business advice, helping expand his network, and acting overall as a kind of sounding board. And even more than just visiting the island, which he also did. Back in New York City, Barak and his wife would so frequently stay over at Epstein's Upper East Side apartment that it turned into a running joke for Epstein's staff. In 2015, Epstein's assistant emails her colleagues to ask, "Jeffrey is wondering if we can get faster internet for apartment 11J. Ehud is requesting it. Looks like this is slowly becoming his apartment." And if their social ties were close, their financial entanglements were even deeper. In 2015, Barak invested $1.5 million in a seed round for Reporty, later rebranded as Carbine, an Israeli emergency communications software startup, and much of the capital for that investment had been given to him directly from Epstein himself. And besides Barak, the only other investor in that initial round was the Israeli Ministry of Economy itself, which contributed $300,000. Basically, Jeffrey Epstein was deeply financially connected to the highest level of Israeli politics. According to Reason magazine, Epstein used Barak to seek out opportunities in the surveillance industry and build connections with powerful figures around the globe, including multiple figures in Israeli intelligence and figures in Vladimir Putin's circle. Of course, there is still the question of what Barak knew and when. He has maintained that he had no idea Epstein was involved with underage girls, but leaked emails reported on by Straight Arrow News show that Barak's own aide sent him news articles about Epstein as early as 2011, 4 years before Epstein invested in Barak's companies. And so Epstein's relationship with a former Prime Minister of Israel has raised even further questions about what exactly Epstein's true role in politics may have been. Because as it would turn out, his connection with Barak wasn't just social and wasn't just financial. Not only is he hosting this guy at his house all the time, he's advising him on politics, emailing about how to deal with Iranian nuclear enrichment, pushing ideas about taking military action against Syria. They weren't just friends and business partners. Epstein was exerting influence with a political agenda as well. And of course, if you want to exert influence over me, you guys can now buy these sweaters where I design and do the embroidery by myself. It's pretty obvious what the meaning is here, that our entire world is being sold out to evil people. So if you want to buy the most Secretary of Commerce, a job in the top 10 of the presidential line of succession that's responsible for advising the president on all matters relating to American business and industry. He's also former neighbors with Jeffrey Epstein for many years. And in October of 2025, as the Epstein case began to ramp up once more, Lutnick would vow in public that he had, in fact, never spoken to or met Epstein after one time in 2005. He even told a story to support his claim.
According to an October 2025 interview with the New York Post, Lutnick said that
Gnostic Christianity is notoriously difficult to define. It doesn't refer to a single sect, nor did they follow a fixed creed. Instead, it's better seen as a range of early Christian movements, bound together by a shared idea that they possessed hidden knowledge about Jesus. In fact, the word Gnostic comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge. Many Gnostic Christians believed that getting into heaven was not through good deeds or even faith, but by possessing secrets about the very nature of reality itself. The Gnostics wrote their beliefs down in texts we can loosely describe as the Gnostic Gospels. They are often styled as secret teachings of Jesus, entrusted to an inner circle of disciples. But to understand where they came from, we must travel back 2,000 years to the dawn of Christianity itself. In the years following the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, communities of his loyal followers spread across the Mediterranean. Over time, these groups developed into the very first Christian churches. But as the decades passed, a problem emerged. The generation that had known Jesus personally were growing old and passing away, and first-hand accounts of Jesus' life were fading along with them. To preserve the teachings for future generations, early believers began writing down what they had seen or heard, often drawing on eyewitness accounts. Some of the earliest writings about Jesus were biographies that announced the good news of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. Today, we know them as the four canonical Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These four Gospels were widely read in the early church and soon became the primary source for Jesus' life and teachings, especially for those who had never known him in the flesh. But at the same time, other accounts of Jesus' life began to circulate. Secret Gospels that claimed to hold untold secrets about the life of Jesus, with hidden teachings meant only for a select few. Many of these are what we now call the Gnostic Gospels. But here's the problem. What did the Gnostics actually believe? People knew that these texts existed.
What you're looking at is an incantation bowl, one of several hundred examples discovered in Mesopotamia. Dating somewhere between the 500s and 700 CE, they're typically shallow clay bowls around the size of a cereal bowl. And as you can guess from the name, incantation bowls, they're covered in magical formulas intended to ward off demons or protect against misfortune. These incantations usually start from the rim and spiral inward toward the center, where you'll often find a little drawing of a demon, sometimes tied up in chains, symbolizing what the bowl will do to the demon. Some of these demon drawings specifically seem to depict and target a female demon. While many are familiar with the story of Adam and Eve, a lesser-known thread in medieval Jewish folklore popularized the idea that Eve was not Adam's first wife, but rather he was initially paired with a demonic figure named Lilith. But who exactly was Lilith? Where did this idea come from? And what about her compelled these communities to resort to magic to protect themselves against her? Traces of the character Lilith stretch as far back as 4,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamian demonology. The name Lilith itself probably derives from the Sumerian word Lil, most often translated as wind or spirit, and the Akkadian words Lilu and Lilitu, a class of male and female demons respectively. Though very little is known about how these beings were understood in ancient Mesopotamia. Ancient Akkadian medical texts blame Lilu-type demons for all sorts of diseases and physical conditions. Generally in these texts, these demons victimize people of the opposite sex, Lilu attacking women, Lilitu attacking men. For example, one medical text attributes seizure-like symptoms to Lilu and Lilitu. First, it describes the symptoms. If, when a state of confusion comes over him, he rolls the whites of his eyes and blood flows from his nose. Then the text offers an explanation for the symptoms. For a woman, Lilu. For a man, Lilitu. In other words, these demons are causing the problem. Another text blames them for fevers. If, when it afflicts him, he continually cries out, my insides, he opens and shuts his eyes, he has fever. The tips of his fingers and toes are cold. And if you try to make that patient talk, he does not answer. It attributes the symptoms to the hand of Lilu. Other ancient Mesopotamian texts suggest that Lilu demons were believed to be the unhappy ghosts of young men and women who died prematurely, and thus doomed to wander the earth unfulfilled. These texts especially focus on young women who died before having sex or died before having kids, and thus they terrorize young men in this limbo state. One text reads, R. Lily slips in a man's window, young girl not fated to be married, young woman who was never impregnated, young woman whose garment pin a good man never loosened. The R. Lily mentioned here, or maiden lily, apparently were a type of unhappy wandering spirit associated with negative sexuality. Here the reference to the demonic figure slipping in through a man's window suggests that they were considered a type of succubus, a female demon who seduces and traps and has sex with men while they're asleep. The scholar Elise Zomer argues that these demons were demonic personifications of sexual envy, the unhappy ghosts of people who never found sexual satisfaction while alive. So it follows that the ritual strategy to deal with these spirits was to perform a symbolic marriage. Rituals called for making figurines of a male and female Lilith demon, and then performing a marriage between the two figurines. The aim of this ritual is to cause the two demons to lose interest in their human victims. In the past, scholars argued that the so-called Bernie relief, a Babylonian representation of a female divine figure, actually depicts a Lilitu. However, most now believe that it's probably Ishtar or some other goddess. Notice how we've been talking about a type or category of demon, not a single entity named Lilith. This holds true for most of her history. Only in later Jewish traditions does Lilith begin to crystallize as a distinct character with her own narrative. But even in this early phase, there are named figures that seem to have influenced the later development of the singular figure Lilith. An epic poem called Gilgamesh and the Haruku Tree, which dates to around 2000 BC,